Afternoon, everybody. It's 2 o'clock. We'll call the meeting to order if that's okay. Great to have everybody here in person. So with that, we'll just get adoption of the agenda, please. That circulator, I'm sure everyone's had time to review it.
Yes.
Evan, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Questions, additions? No? Okay. Motion carried. We'll go on to the adoption of minutes from November 23rd. Can I get a motion to adopt those, please? Thank you, sir. Rob, did you second that? Perfect. Any mistakes, any corrections? Hearing none. Yeah, we already got that. So, yeah, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carried. Great. Sure.
Just for members of the committee, I know it's a very common practice when people get Outlook invites that they don't send responses because they don't want a ton of emails going back. When we send you an email invite for these meetings, please actually send a response. That just lets us know who's coming, just so we have an idea of gauging quorum, because you know that we send invites out and we send your agenda. If you could just do that going forward, that would really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, we don't have any presentations or delegations, so on to reports. Blake.
Thank you very much. The first report today is a heritage alteration permit application that is being referred to committee for comment. That application is at 34818 Armstrong Avenue. And before we turn it to the committee for comment, we will have a brief presentation by the planner, Mr. James Brisna.
Thank you, Blake.
Yes, so the city has received a heritage alteration permit application for the property at 34818 Armstrong Avenue in Claiborne Village. And this property is a heritage property within the Claiborne Village Heritage Conservation Area as designated in the city's official community plan. Heritage alteration permits are issued by the Director of Development Planning. However, before the Director reviews these applications in detail, we present the applications at the DTAC committee to receive any relevant input and recommendations for the Director's considerations. And this is reflected in the terms of reference of DTAC here, where it says review and make recommendations on development applications for properties situated in heritage designated areas of the community. So I'm here today to present this application and, as I mentioned, ask the committee for any input or recommendations relating to the proposal. So Claiborne Village is an important historical area for Abbotsford. It was the first company town to be established in British Columbia, dating back from 1905. Almost 120 years ago. And in order to help conserve the historical significance of Claiborne Village, the city has designated these lands as a heritage conservation area, which means that any development within the area is required to obtain a heritage alteration permit. This is a map of the heritage of the Claiborne Village Heritage Conservation Area. You can see the property outlined in red right here. That's the subject property. And you'll see there properties colored white and properties colored blue. So the white properties are what are called non-heritage properties, and the blue properties are heritage properties. Each of them need heritage permits for development. However, there are different sets of guidelines for each one, and I imagine the ones for the heritage properties are a little bit more stringent in trying to preserve the heritage elements of those properties. Okay. Oh, yeah, so and the subject property is blue there, as you can see, so it is a heritage property. And it will have its special set of guidelines that it needs to adhere to. So as mentioned, we are wishing to obtain input from the committee regarding the heritage alteration permit application. And in this regard, DTAC is being asked to please consider to support the application as proposed, to support the application in an amended form, or not support the application. So following consideration from the committee, the application will proceed to the Director of Development Planning for consideration, as council has delegated this authority to the Director, and then he will make a decision on issuing a heritage alteration permit. So this is the property here, in and amongst Armstrong and Wright Street, an aerial photo. The official community plan designates the property as urban 4 detached. So that's one of the larger lot, single-family dwelling home land use designations. The zoning is urban estate residential zone, RS1. This, again, is a picture of the Claiborne Village Heritage Conservation Area. This is a street view showing the front of the subject property. And here we get into the applicant's proposal. So the top of the image is the front. This would be Armstrong Ave here. And then this would be the rear of the property. So the applicant is proposing to remove a single-story portion of the house in the rear and replace it with a 2-story portion as an addition. These are the floor plans. So you can see existing floor plans, proposed floor plans. There's not much difference. There's a vestibule or entranceway that they're proposing off the side. I think they've got a full deck off the back there, whereas there's just this small one on the original. These are the elevations of the existing house, and in red it shows you what exists there now. So this is looking from one perspective, the other perspective. This would be the front of the house where there's not going to be much change or any change, and then the rear of the house here. And then you can see what's being proposed from each elevation is the addition here at a 2-story level. Here, this is the vestibule that sticks out from the side. This is the rear view. And then this is the color scheme and materials that are being proposed. So the applicant's architect did do a case study of Claiborne Village, looking around at different houses to determine the best colors, best material. That's reflected in these next 2 slides here. So they went around and looked at some comparable homes and how they were built, pitches of the roof, architectural details, the dormers, materials used, and they came up with this image here. So this is what's being proposed. So again, staff is here asking the DTAC committee to please make any comments or recommendations that they see appropriate. And as a guideline, we're suggesting that you could A, support the proposal as proposed, support the proposal in an amended format, or not support the application. And if anybody has any questions or wants to add some additional information, I'm not sure if Andrew Heinrichs is here. I actually haven't met him in person, so I don't know if he's here or not. Doesn't seem that he is.
Is anybody online? No. Excuse me. Great. Okay, James, thank you for the presentation. Committee members, do we have any questions, concerns? Yes, please.
Ted is not able to be here, but he did send a fairly lengthy set of comments. I thought it was quite comprehensive.
Yeah.
Very.
Reading through it, his biggest one was the question of what finish would be on the siding,
Thank you.
whether it's cedar plank or smooth or
Yeah, so the image there that was up before, I can just go back to it. Yeah, so actually, I didn't mention a second part of the proposal, which is that in addition to the replacement, they are doing some replacement work on the cladding of the house, so the brickwork, the fascia, sort of the strips there along the roof lines. I think they're adding some architectural details to the porch, and just basically trying to repair any of the components of the house that have fallen into disrepair. But this does include, I know it's not easy to read, but it does, yeah, at the bottom there, it includes the colors and the material that he is proposing.
I think Ted's question was, what is the finish of that gonna be? Not the colors or the
The
product.
material,
Yeah, like whether it's a cedar, like a wood.
so the blue part that is mostly being used for the addition in the rear, that's proposed to be blue hardy board.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in the hardy, you can get these different, like cedar mill, smooth or wood look.
Let's see, I've got.
I'm not a heritage expert, but
Yeah,
that's
no,
Tim.
See how it's specified. Okay. It doesn't look like we have that spec'd on the plans. Would the committee have a suggestion for a style that should be incorporated on that finish?
I would refer to Ted for
Ted.
that.
Yeah.
I think Ted was recommending that a full color and material board get put together, effectively reviewed by staff, which would be.
I think these were suggestions by Ted, but I don't think that's in the
I think the
applicant's.
suggestion there would likely be like to have that cedar mill finish on it, right? That's likely gonna.
More historic in
More
nature.
historic, yeah.
Okay. So he's actually making some suggestions in this case of what would be a good idea to use.
Correct, yes.
A couple of questions and suggestions. So staff have received that email and we'll review that as part of the committee's recommendation. But we can certainly also incorporate feedback regarding the finish of that material.
Yeah, outside of that, I didn't have any.
Great, thank you, Kevin.
That's great.
Any other questions or comments?
One question,
Yes,
just
Ken?
when this whole process comes up, like when an application like this gets submitted, like, maybe this is more of like a question for staff, like how long does it generally take to kind of turn around these things by the time like they engage their architect or designer, submit these drawings to you and then it goes to staff and then it comes to us and then it goes back for either approval or a request for amendment, like how long does that process take?
Good question, James. Do you have any insight based on this application?
Yeah, well, this project has been moving quite quickly while it's been in our hands. So, a typical application, say for rezoning or even a development permit, could be 8 to 10, perhaps even 12 months before it hits the director for, review and decision, or council for review and decision. In this case, we received this application, 2023 in August. So there was some setup time to get the application put together. It goes to the director, he assigns it to someone, and that usually takes a good month or so before it'll actually hit the planner's desk, which would be me. And then I have my duty to set the file up. We refer the application out to different people and organizations to get comments. We write a first review, and that's usually about 3 months after the application has been submitted. We could have come to the DTAC committee earlier if there was a meeting in December or January. So we are running a little bit behind. But these projects, I think just because, I don't want to say they're simple, but they're definitely not as complex as some of the other things we deal with, like with, industrial and commercial and residential developments. So it's a much quicker process. And I would expect after following up with the applicant on the questions or suggestions that we got, I might have a report to Blake within another month or so. And maybe even get a decision a week or two after that, so, yeah.
So application setup to first review is usually about 4 months, or 2 months beyond that, and then we'll give them an opportunity to adjust and then issue. So looks about 8 months would be my guess today.
Yeah.
Any follow-up question yet?
No.
Okay, great. Yes. we'll
Just a quick comment. I think it looks like it's a substantial improvement over the piece that's being demolished. Just want to encourage the owner and the contractor at the end of the day to really focus in on the detailing of the brick and the trim work for these heritage houses. It's pretty complex, and if you get it wrong, it doesn't look right. So,
Good suggestion. Thank you.
Actually, on that note, to add on that, like, is there any, I'm assuming there's some sort of a deposit or compliance fee that's held to make sure that form and character is achieved, right? And like executed properly?
Yeah, correct. We do take a security for exterior finishes. And then prior to release, we do an inspection to verify that it substantially complies with the permit that we've issued.
Great, thank you. So what are the wishes? We have 3 recommendations here. We have to pick one. So, committee members, what's the pleasure? Anyone prepared to make a motion on one of the 3? Or the 3? You want to put them, just get them back up on there.
Perhaps I can help.
Support the application as proposed. Support the application with the indicated amendments, or not to support the application on those 3.
The discussion today would suggest potentially recommendation number 2, support the application with amendment to include cedar milled finish on the hardy blank. Would be my suggestion for the committee's consideration.
There we go.
I'll make a motion.
Perfect. Ken, any second? Perfect. Lucas, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Perfect. Motion carried. Thank you. Next is 6.2, Tree Protection Bylaw Stage 2 update.
Thank you, Councilor Stu. I'm going to actually turn the table for this one.
Excellent, great.
And just reintroduce myself. I'm Todd Sturgeon. I'm the General Manager of Parks, Recreation and Culture. Before I turn everything over to Ms. Price, we're actually going to have our staff group that's worked on this, just a selection of our staff group, introduce themselves so that you know who's answering questions should they come up. So maybe we'll start with Ms. Pope.
Good afternoon, Danielle Pope, Director of PRC Planning and Business Services.
Riley Sloka, Director of Parks Operations. Hi, Sean Gurney, Manager of Parks, Urban Forestry and Trails.
And Melissa Price, Parks Planning Manager, and I'll be here in a second.
Yeah, great. Thank you for the introduction. As Melissa takes the podium, I just wanted to note that both Riley and Sean have to actually attend one of our community engagement sessions, which is going on this afternoon. So if they have to excuse themselves a little bit earlier, apologies in advance, but you'll see in the presentation here that's a pretty key step that we're in right now. So this committee saw this topic in late 2023. I'm sure everybody remembers that presentation and discussion. Ms. Price is going to kind of present our further evolution on this after a bit of a technical review and with the recommendations that are in your package. So we've got about half an hour of information to go through, and we've got a consultant online to help inform the discussion as well that Melissa can introduce. But without further ado, I'll turn it over to Melissa.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I think I recognize some faces that were here for the first round, but some new faces like hi Lucas that weren't here for the first round. So for some of you, some of it will be sort of an expanded version of what we heard, and then for some of you it'll be new. So we'll have lots of time for questions after. So really, we're taking direction to update this tree bylaw from our urban forest strategy, as well as our PRC master plan, which both identified this as something that needs to happen. Our current bylaw is quite outdated. Our urban forest strategy was endorsed by council in March 2022, and it does give us very clear mandate to update this bylaw. There are 6 strategic action items in the urban forest strategy that directly align or kind of fold into the recommendations today. And we're really heading towards the latter end of stage 2, which is where we've put together sort of our refined approach for the recommendations that we have brought to council first week of February, the Community Culture Advisory Committee, you folks, as well as we're doing our public engagement now as well. So we're getting pretty close to where we feel we have some very refined recommendations, and so provided our public engagement process goes well and there's no major changes to be considered, we'll be heading back to council in March, and then probably for bylaw readings in April. It's sort of the plan as it stands now. So any of the feedback we get from you guys today will help kind of form the final sort of refinement of our recommendations. So before we get into the presentation, I'll just touch on this really briefly. I touched on this originally, but this is just to kind of highlight that we have kind of three major categories of tools that we use to regulate and manage our forests. There's the higher level tools, which are sort of regional growth strategy, are now our urban forest strategy, as well as our OCP gives us sort of high level guiding policy. Land use tools, so our zoning bylaws and development permits that kind of tell us how we manage our land, and that has an indirect application of how we manage our trees. And then finally, the tools that regulate our trees themselves. And so in Abbotsford, we have two streams, which is the development permits and the tree cutting permits. So today we're really just talking about one of the tools, which is the tree bylaw, and how we propose to update that to make it more effective for managing our forests long term. So we present the recommendations in two major categories. On our major influence, these are the ones that are going to have significant changes, how we manage trees and how we manage our forests. And then administrative best practices, or the sort of more minor changes, clarification to definitions and things that will help sort of support some of the other larger recommendations. Before I get into them, I'm just going to clarify two terms that I will use a lot and that you'll see on the screen is DBH, an acronym for diameter at breast height. So that's just a standard way in which we measure trees. So when we talk about a certain 20 centimeters DBH, it's how you would take a measurement of how big a tree is, diameter at breast height. So that's one term I'll be using, as well as tree size at maturity. So when we get into some of the later recommendations, we start focusing more on canopy targets, and the size of the tree matters when we start getting into that discussion. So a small tree species at maturity will have a smaller crown width than a large tree species at maturity. So just keep that in mind. So we will get into the recommendations. There are 16 major recommendations. The first 5 are really looking at which trees we actually regulate in the bylaw and then how we can better protect them. So recommendation 1 is to expand the retention area definition to include our steep slope areas that are identified in our official community plan. So the retention areas currently are areas where that include sort of like riparian areas, tree areas that might be protected by a covenant, or tree protection areas that have been identified through like a development application review process. So they've been identified on a plan, and so these are what we currently call tree retention areas. So we're adding those steep slope areas to that, basically just to bring it into alignment with policy within our OCP. With every recommendation, I'll have a following slide that is just, it's not inclusive, but it's touching on some of the anticipated outcomes of the recommendation. So again, just to provide greater tree protection within potentially geotechnically sensitive areas and to align with our OCP policy. Recommendation 2 is to expand the definition of tree. So what do we consider a tree under this bylaw? So this is going to look at including trees that are greater than or equal to 10 centimeters in diameter within those retention areas. So not across the city, but within those retention areas. And then replacement trees of any size required in any kind of permit. So currently, when people replace trees after they've removed trees, they're going in at a very small size. And so currently those trees are not protected. So it's sort of a bit of a loophole in the bylaw right now, whereas we go through a process of replacing trees, but then they're not always protected because they don't meet that minimum sort of protection level right now. So we're including those. City trees of any size, yard trees required for subdivision. And we've included some language around when we would protect closely planted rows of trees. Some people call them hedges. and a hedge-like form, however you want to reference it, but really bringing clarity around when we want to protect closely planted rows of trees and when we don't, because there's some, I guess, sorry, I don't know what I'm saying. It's been difficult to clearly administer the bylaw when with respect to what's a hedge, what's not a hedge, when do we protect these trees, when do we not. So we've added a definition for that and looking at protecting rows of trees where at least 5 in a row and at least one of them sort of meets that minimum size, then those would be protected under the bylaw and would have to be replaced if removed as other trees would. So again, we're going to provide clarity around the size of the trees regulated by the bylaw, emphasizing protection of community assets, those city trees, and then closing the loophole of when newly planted trees are actually protected. Recommendation 3 is to compile a list of city-owned significant trees that meet one or more of the criteria and then present those to council to be nominated to the schedule. So we currently have a provision in our bylaw to identify significant trees within the community. And currently the schedule is empty. So it's not one of the provisions that we've enacted within the community. So there's been support to kind of resurrect this idea and bring it to life. And the feedback has been like it makes sense to probably start this process on public lands and then also identify how we might introduce that on private lands as well. So we could use the same criteria to start also identifying significant trees on private lands through the review and approval of subdivision and rezoning applications. But at this stage, we wouldn't be, wanting to force the nomination to the schedule. But it could be something that could be considered. So basically having a tree identified as a significant tree and nominated to the schedule, it does provide the highest level of tree protection because anytime you would remove a tree from the schedule, it would have to be approved by council. This could help build awareness in the community about what significant trees are, where they're located, just to bring more awareness of trees and their importance to the community, as well as the significant trees could be secured on private lands through like a mutual agreement of the city and the private property owner. Getting into recommendation 4, this is really looking at streamlining the security approach for when we are retaining trees on construction sites. So currently the tree protection bylaw does not take securities when, during construction or when there's trees being removed or replaced. However, our development permit process does typically take a security for tree protection measures when there's associated with the development site. So this is really looking at aligning both bylaw and the DP process the same and kind of focusing on valuing the trees rather than sort of the materials that are being used to protect the trees. So it's kind of standardizing the values and then it's also capping it. So recognizing on some of these very large development sites, that number in theory could get quite high. So it's really just putting a cap on that from a security deposit amount. And then of course the deposit would be refunded upon final acceptance of all the construction and confirmation that trees have been protected. I'm just gonna grab a quick drink of water. And then, anticipated outcome, that we're going to standardize the security approach for both of those streams in which we issue permits. Incentivize, the idea is that we could incentivize greater protection, improve accountability, and reduce tree damage during construction. So just as a side note, going through our consultation stage with sort of some strategic advisory groups, industry professionals, we did hear that, there's not enough, we're not being successful in implementing tree protection during construction stages. So through the amendments to the bylaw, we're trying to look at ways to incentivize and to bring more awareness around the importance of, maintaining those sort of protection barriers and protecting the trees during the construction phases. So that's where that comes from. And this would enable more robust enforcement and improve, ideally, the protection of our urban forests. So 5 is connected with the last one, and it's basically establishing clear enforcement and mitigation mechanisms around where trees are damaged either partly or wholly. So it's looking at how we can approach either tree mitigation to salvage trees that are in part damaged but could potentially be still retained on site, or where, trees are just completely damaged to the point where they can't be mitigated and retained. So it's looking at partial or full forfeiting of securities in those cases. So it builds in mechanisms where we can use those funds for planting elsewhere if the worst sort of case scenario happens. So the idea of this is that we hopefully incentivize greater protection, improve accountability, and reduce tree damage during construction stages. And then it provide a clear process for seeking mitigation work and compensation in those scenarios. Okay, so recommendations 6 and 16 are now going to focus more around retention and replacement of trees. And I've grouped the first few because they all deal with this idea around strengthening the city's ability to refuse removal permits, which is also something that we heard multiple times from people, is that we need to put more rigor, thank you. That was the word I was trying to think of, rigor around when we can actually say no to a permit, because the current bylaw has very few scenarios that currently allow us to actually refuse a permit. So recommendation 6 is to enable the city to refuse the removal of trees that are greater or equal to 60 centimeters DBH, so that's diameter at breast height, unless it's necessary for the health of the tree, safety, or to prevent immediate damage to infrastructure or buildings, or to allow permitted use and density. So we can't do that. And then we would replace the clause to allow removals to prevent significant immediate damage to infrastructure. So basically remove nuisance and put more specific criteria around when you can remove it and when we can say no. We also heard, we heard, and also from our experience, we know that the nuisance and obstruction clause is extremely subjective, and you can literally make any case under that to remove a tree. So it doesn't mean that we still can't recognize that in some cases there might be legitimate reasons to remove a tree for nuisance reasons, but just as an outright provision, we're replacing it with something with a little bit more structure. And then we would require applicants to submit reports from a certified arborist or registered professional forester when requesting removal of significant trees or trees greater than 60 centimeters DPH or within those retention areas, if for any other reason than health or safety. So if it's just because I want to, then we would require to build a little bit more rigor around what that process looks like and why we're, the considerations of why it should or would be removed. So anticipated outcome would be that it would expand, obviously, our ability to refuse tree removal permits, responds to feedback from our technical advisory review stage that we need to strengthen those refusal mechanisms, and then remove some of the subjectivity out of it, and ideally will improve our urban forests. Okay, recommendation 9. So this is where, I'll note that this scenario is not going to happen a lot of the time, but it does happen from time to time. So this is where we would require private persons that are requesting to remove city trees, so for their own benefit, not for a hazardous or dangerous situation, but for some sort of gain from the private individual, that we would require them to be replaced at the cost of purchasing, planting, and maintaining a replacement tree, but also the amenity value of the tree. So the amenity value would be calculated using an industry standard, and basically they would pay the amenity value to hopefully help reflect some of the value that amenity actually brings to the community, with respect to sort of those amenity intangibles, making it tangible, but there are environmental improvements, air quality, cultural aspects. So sorry, I'm just losing my words today. I apologize, but so it's to recognize that amenity value of the city asset, essentially. So we're going to differentiate between community assets and private trees in that regard, and ensure adequate compensation of that tree if it were to be replaced. And then this is also to help incentivize tree retention, because really that's, we're throughout this bylaw, we're trying to think of ways to incentivize carrots and sticks, I guess you'd say. So recently, for the purpose of kind of illustrating what some of these examples would look like, if you were to, we had a couple of assessments done based on this assessment method, trees you could recognize around the city. So this is the big oak tree that's in front of City Hall, just actually right up front here on South Fraser Way. And so this is a red oak, and it was valued at $38,000 as that amenity value. And the second tree was one of the big firs, which is just out behind you here in front of the courthouse. And that one was valued at just under $95,000. So just to give you an idea, the range can be anywhere from $1,000 to, over $100,000, just depending on the tree, the species, the location, size, all sorts of factors that go into that assessment. Okay, and recommendation 10 is to update the tree replacement ratios. So really the ratios that we currently have, we're not changing those, but we are proposing to increase the number of replacements for some of those really larger trees that we currently are not accounting for. And so those are those trees that are this greater or equal to 60 centimeters DBH to a 4:1 ratio. And then for those significantly smaller trees, those new trees that we're the ones that are 10 up to 10, to just 1:1, kind of recognizing that, when they're going in the ground, they're small, and if they're taken out, that really a 1:1 replacement is appropriate. It doesn't need to be more than that. And then again, to bring clarity around, this conversation of, I put hedge in brackets, but closely planted trees, when we protect those and when we don't. So essentially what we're saying is if you do have one of those closely planted rows of trees where it meets the criteria of one of them being at least 20 centimeters DBH, then you would be required to protect it, and if it had to be removed, it could be replaced with either another hedge row, like so hedging cedars to replace it, or it could be replaced at one tree for every 4 meters of that row. So it kind of builds in some flexibility, and it also, I think it also acknowledges like the role that hedges, the limited role that hedges do play with our urban forest canopy. So they do have, they do contribute. They don't contribute the same way that other, more open grown trees do, but they do provide some contribution to our urban forest canopy. So we wanted to kind of recognize that through this bylaw, and then also build some flexibility as to how it can be replaced. And then finally, with counting replacement trees, so this is where we start talking about small, medium, and large species at maturity. So recognizing and trying to build in flexibility with how we replace trees. We're saying that we can do 2. So for small trees, it would count as 0.5 replacement trees, and a large tree would count as 2. So generally, when we're talking about replacement trees, we're talking about medium size. But to build flexibility as to how you might fit replacement trees into a site, depending on what the constraints are, we're going to allow, or we're recommending that we could put small trees in, or one large tree instead of 2 mediums or 4 small. So it gives you a bit more flexibility as to how and where you can plant those trees on a site to hopefully make it easier to achieve your replacement ratios and ultimately your canopy cover. So again, requires greater replacement for notably larger trees and less for notably smaller. Greater flexibility on selecting your appropriate stock size, and limits the application but recognizes the role that hedges can contribute to the urban forest canopy. Okay, so on the same vein of replacement stock, we did hear through our strategic advisory that the size of our current replacements. So currently we require, a deciduous tree to be 6 centimeters at 6 centimeters DBH. So like about, 6 centimeters like that. And then a coniferous to be like 3 meters high. So we've reduced the two sizes of those down to 5 and to 2, just kind of bring that stock size down a bit to make it a little bit easier to, for a few reasons, to acquire the stock. There might be more variety in smaller stock, and also just for transporting and logistical purposes. And then within retention areas, even further, currently through the development permit process, we often are looking at allowing even smaller stock sizes and like getting down into like 5-gallon pot sizes. So we wanted to, again, bring alignment between a tree cutting permit and a development permit and kind of formalize the size of the stock for these retention areas. So in those riparian areas and steep slope areas, often it makes a lot more sense to put a higher volume of smaller stock in. You can carry it in by hand. It doesn't cause as much damage when you're digging up to put in smaller stock versus huge stock. So we're building in, I guess, more flexibility to have that option as well. And again, the anticipated outcome is, greater flexibility in choosing the appropriate size stock to meet the specific site conditions. And in some cases, in those retention, those sensitive areas, it can improve canopy outcomes because they're going in the ground at a smaller size and they can have more time to adjust to their surroundings and kind of adapt as they grow into mature trees. All right, we're on number 12, so we're almost there. This is where we're going to start talking more about canopy cover, and it's a bit of a shift in our bylaw that we're proposing, where current bylaw is really just about remove and replace. You take out this many trees at this size, you replace it with this many trees at this size, regardless of how many fit on the site. And so it's really a numbers bylaw. So one of the shifts in our recommendations is, looking at more of long-term canopy coverage goals. So this recommendation 12 here is where we sort of start getting into that more. And so it's looking at introducing a density target of 60 trees per hectare net developable area and capping it at that. So this is really looking at, regardless of how many trees you start with on any property that's developing, you would never have to replace more than your density cap. So in some cases on these heavily treed sites, as we start getting up into the mountain, sometimes you could have, I don't know how many, like 1,000 replacement trees if you didn't take, this density, this target cap. So these 3 images here, just look at some examples of what that might look like on individual properties. So if basically on the first one there, they're proposing to remove 1 tree, I'm looking right here, and their replacement requirement to remove 1 medium-sized tree would be to replace it with 2. That's our current replacement ratio. In the second scenario, if they remove that same tree but had 3 trees in their backyard somewhere, then they'd already be meeting their density, their canopy cap. So they would not have to actually do any more replacement trees under the new proposal. However, under the current bylaw, they'd have to replace 2 trees still, even though they had 3 trees on their property. And in the third scenario, again, same tree being removed, but in this scenario, they have a large tree in their backyard that counts as 2 because it's a large tree at maturity. So again, in the third scenario, they would not have to provide replacement trees. So it's just trying to illustrate that we're not focused so much on how many replacements you need to provide. We're focused on your canopy cover, achieving that 40% long term. So again, introducing a replacement tree planting cap on heavily treed sites and enables gradual balance of tree canopy over time. And just a note here, 60 trees per hectare is to achieve 40% canopy cover by 2045, which is the objective laid out in the urban forest strategy. These are just some additional properties, some hypothetical scenarios, like so for this first one here, if you had approximately 400 meters square infill lot, it'd be 2 trees to achieve your 40% canopy cover. A larger house or perhaps a fourplex on a 700 meter square lot would be 4 trees. A site that's, 1450, which is maybe a small apartment site, looking at 9 trees to achieve 40% canopy cover. And then getting into I guess you'd say like a medium, small medium townhouse site, 27 trees. So just to give you an idea of site size and what the tree canopy cover target might look like. So to incentivize tree retention on development properties, basically we would look at sort of trying to incentivize retention of trees on development properties. So not within those riparian areas, but additional trees within the development area of the property. We would credit the developer towards their replacement trees at those ratios there, which essentially align with the replacement ratios we talked about earlier. And then, basically the credits. So 2 trees for every replacement tree species that is large, 1 tree for every replacement tree species that is medium, and then 0.5 for small, and then 0 for anything that's not in good health or hazardous. So we wouldn't count those. And so hopefully we will have greater tree retention on developing properties and incentivize meaningful tree planting on developing properties. So again, the right fit over quantity. All right, so currently we require, we have a price of $300 per replacement tree. So meaning when you cut trees and you have to replace trees and you can't fit them on your site, or you choose to opt out of that, the replacement value is currently $300. So just through an assessment of kind of more fair market values, this ranges anywhere from up to $1,000 in some communities for a replacement tree. So we've basically just we've chosen some modest increases to try and align the replacement tree cost with sort of more just market pricing. So that's what those recommendation 14 is. And again, to require the same amount for a security deposit that would be refunded once you've planted those trees. So pricing more accurately reflects cost recovery for purchase, installation, and 1-year maintenance. And then it may actually, with the prices going up a little bit, it may encourage more planting and less forfeiting of cash securities, ideally. Okay, so similar to recommendation 12, where we started talking about density capping of replacements, this is now talking about density minimums for trees. So use a tree density target, again, of 60 trees per hectare of the net developable area to require developing properties to achieve a minimum density of trees. So regardless of how many they start with. So you could have a tree with a site with a lot of trees, and they're removing trees, and then, as long as they're meeting that target, we could cap how many they have to replace. And then on the other side, you could have a developing property that has, 1 tree or 2 trees or no trees. And this is essentially saying that we want to, through that development process, bring their tree canopy density up to the same level. So we're sort of kind of doing this and hopefully balancing our tree canopy across the community over time. So sparsely treed sites will be planted to meet canopy targets, citywide equitable approach. So it's not just penalizing people with trees, or penalizing in air quotes, people with trees. And then hopefully we'll have a gradual balance of tree canopy distribution over time with this approach. And the final recommendation under the major influence is really just looking at these rural properties. So when I say rural properties, I'm talking about properties that are not in the ALR, so not agricultural properties, but also not within our urban development boundary. So the majority of these properties would be on sort of Sumas Mountain area. There's a couple other pockets, but so this is basically recognizing that a lot of those properties rely on their ability to manage their forests for daily needs. They often will use the wood for heating their homes. So this is allowing owners within this category of land to remove up to 5 trees annually without application or removal fees, provided that they're meeting that 60 trees per hectare density on their property. And then they're also not taking out any of those really big trees or trees that are in those environmentally sensitive areas. So it allows some flexibility for them to manage their forests, which are sometimes on very large properties. but also it just prevents sort of the incremental clear cutting or wholesale clear cutting of sites. So again, promotes an equitable application of the bylaw on all rural residential lands. And then again, the flexibility for individuals to, use some of that resource for their daily activity and needs. So it's a lot of information. I've been talking a lot. The administrative best practices, it's a lot briefer. So should I just keep going through those and then we'll do questions, or do you
Sure.
want to pause? Yeah, okay.
Is that okay with everyone?
I just always want to take a little bit of a break here because it's a lot of information. I do recognize that. It is a regulatory bylaw, so it's a hard thing to summarize in less words in order to capture the information. So, all right. So administrative best practices. Again, these are not major changes, but these are things that are going to clarify the bylaw, streamline it, and support some of the other recommendations that are being proposed. So again, we are proposing to change the name of the bylaw to tree management bylaw. It's currently a tree protection bylaw, but the tree management bylaw would reflect more the scope of what we are achieving with the bylaw. So it's not just protection, it's about retention and replacement and other things like that as well. So improve and standardize permit information requirements. So anytime we're receiving an arborist report or hazard tree report or wind throw assessments, let's just have those come in a very standardized format so that we know that we're getting the right information in the order that we need it in order to make good decisions. And clear and up-to-date definitions. So again, there's a few definitions around what damage is, and so we want to make sure that we clarify things around topping and leaf pruning, and at what point do they become damaging to a tree. So just to provide more clarity around that. Clarify DBH measurements, so that diameter at breast height measurements on multi-stem trees. So just to clarify that, make it a more basically align it with more industry standards that make a little bit more sense and reflect the actual measurement. Defining developing property. Yeah, so some of these recommendations relate around when a property is developing, so what does that mean? And then net developable area, again, just defining these things so that it's clear in the bylaw what we mean when we say those things. And then again, one more is to just clearly bring clarity around how we define those protection zones around trees. So we currently use a drip line, which is just a very simplified approach to identifying that critical root zone area around trees. So, so we're going to update that approach, and it basically clarifies it. It brings more flexibility, but it also brings more accuracy in how we define that area. So it's not just a cookie cutter approach for every tree. And then another thing we heard through the strategic advisory review was we heard that our current standard for tree protection fencing is it's quite expensive to build. It requires, depending on how much you're putting up, a lot of wood. And it often gets thrown away in the end, so it's quite wasteful. So we are introducing, we're not going to get rid of that standard because it's probably still applicable in some situations, but we're going to introduce a couple of more standards of options for tree protection fencing. One of them is shown here, and it's really showing that using a aircraft kind of cable situation with wood stakes, providing a similar structure to the sort of the former standard that we have, but a lot of these materials can be easily recycled and reused and much less costly to construct. So just introducing some options for how we protect trees within the bylaw. And then an improved species list for replacement tree planting. So this would be a species list that reflects climate adaptation, aligns with changes to the stock size and replacement, and then improves species diversity. And it's also going to list small, medium, and large trees at maturity. So there's clear direction as to which trees you can choose for which sort of circumstances. Fees and penalties, so we currently do not have an application fee for our tree cutting permit applications. So this is introducing a nominal, non-refundable application fee to help with some cost recovery from an administrative perspective, $25. And then we also do not currently charge inspection fees for either an initial inspection or any kind of follow-up inspections. So we are recommending to introduce not an initial, but a subsequent site inspection fee that would basically be, cost recovery based on the time spent doing that. So this is really just to recuperate some of the administrative and staffing costs that we are currently not recuperating, and to incentivize less follow-ups. After we've done that initial inspection, given information and given guidance, we will come out again, but the second time we're gonna have, hopefully we can recuperate some of those costs. So that was everything. This is on the screen is really just a summary of what I stated in the beginning of sort of where we are in the process. So we're, as Todd mentioned, we'll be leaving right after this, or maybe even before this ends, to go out to one of our community engagement events. And we plan to bring back what we've heard from the community and through the committees in March to council, just give them a bit of an update before we move right into drafting the bylaw, provided we get kind of thumbs up all around.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Thank you for your presentation. Sorry, Todd?
Sorry, I think you have a recommendation.
Oh.
Oh, we put it in there.
It's in next.
Yeah, just perhaps it.
53. Yeah, there is one more slide, yeah.
My there it is.
There we go.
Yeah, my
Thanks.
button wasn't working, but yeah. So we are recommending that the committee endorse the recommendations of the major influence changes to the pending tree production bylaw as outlined in the background report that was sent to you, has much more detail than what was in the presentation.
Maybe Councillor Suter, if I may, just kind of a high level summary philosophically. I think what we're trying to articulate here is that we're trying to add more rigor to the bylaw to maintain the integrity of the urban forest on public lands. In terms of private lands, ones that are already contributing significantly to that urban forest target of 40% by 2045, right, is actually honor and respect that they're doing that. For those that we're seeking to have additional tree canopy, is providing a lot of flexibility, a lot of avenues to success on those properties. So, there's different pathways to achieving that across the entire community as an intent. And overall, we're really trying to balance the piece of how do we grow the community, which we know is going to happen, and grow the urban forest at the same time. So, we're confident that we've kind of hit that balance, but certainly we're open to questions and thoughts from the committee.
Thank you, Todd. For questions and concerns, in person or online?
I do have a question, and it might be in here. I apologize if I'm asking something that's in here. Target is 60 per hectare. What is it today?
So through the chair, so 60 trees per hectare is basically a STEMS conversion of what it will take to achieve 40% canopy cover. So it's how we will know if we're achieving 40% canopy cover. But the canopy cover of Abbotsford today, I think is what you're asking, is what is our percentage of canopy cover across the city today? Is that something, I know our consultant, Camille, is here. Is that something you would be able to answer, Camille?
Through the chair, just give me a minute. I'm pulling up the strategy as we speak to make sure that I don't misspeak. So just give me a second here and I can share that.
Sure. So second part of the question, the 60 per hectare relates to the overall canopy. Is this just a blanket target across the whole city? Or would it be following the different density zones for areas?
The target is over the whole city, but that obviously recognize that certain areas of the city will have higher density of canopy cover, and certain areas that have lower density will have
higher
less.
density of homes, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the target is across the city, is citywide, excluding agricultural lands. But within that, there will be areas that have less and will have more, which will hopefully balance out, but the target is for across the city. Yeah.
So you don't envision something that's being prepared here that all of a sudden will go to you and developers can't work with it?
So this is why we're going through this
Yeah.
process of asking the questions and speaking with the development community outside of this as well. It is a dance. It is a balance of, you know, like what Todd said, growing our community. I think what we're trying to build into this bylaw is some flexibility, some incentives, and I think we can achieve 60 trees per hectare on a small infill lot.
So maybe the most direct answer to that question is no. We're not anticipating something that causes challenges for developments, right? That goes to the overall philosophical piece. We know that we have to grow the community, right? There's lots of avenues in here, and there may be sites where we can't achieve that canopy cover. That's fine. We have other sites that we will be in excess of that canopy cover, right? Public lands or private lands, right? So we want to provide a lot of those opportunities, but it's not simply a case of like, well, we can't approve something because you can't fit your 9 trees on the site on that, right? Maybe you can fit 5 and we're taking, you know, a cash in lieu for the other ones. So, Blake, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say that Melissa touched on it very early on in the presentation about it's not intended to overcome the use and density permissions. So we've got to work side by side and achieve both at the same time. And I think the bylaw builds that in as a philosophical kind of approach.
Maybe go back to Camille.
Yeah, please.
Yes, through the chair. So yes, to answer the question on the canopy cover, as of 2017, which was the latest available data when the strategy was put together, canopy cover was measured citywide at 40%, and the target was to maintain that. We know that Abbotsford is going to be changing a lot with new uses going into previously forested land. So this was in an effort to ensure that we have tree canopies spread across the city, and you know, not losing canopy despite the fact that we are changing some of those forest uses.
Great, thank you. Kim, did you have a follow-up?
No, that's
Sure. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, Lucas.
Just a couple quick questions. Back to the hedge conversation. I just want to make sure I understand. If there's one tree within that hedge that's over the size, the entire hedge is protected, correct?
Through the chair. So yes, the way we're looking at it is if you have 5 or more closely planted trees, and one of those is greater than or equal to 20 centimeters DBH, then that cluster of trees would be protected. Usually when a row of trees is planted at the same time, they're often similar in size, so it wouldn't usually be a scenario where you'd have one big one and the rest are little splinters. So there's too many ways to consider hedges. We were trying to take a pretty simple approach just to bring clarity around when we consider something a hedge and when it should be protected. And then also building the flexibility in is of allowing a hedge to go back in place if you can't fit, you know, full-size trees in there.
Okay. And my second question, just determining the tree protection zone. If you're not using the drip line any longer, how is it being calculated, I suppose? And do you anticipate that that's more onerous or less onerous than the original way of doing it?
If I could ask our, maybe Sean to speak on that?
Yeah, through the chair. Currently, sorry, repeat the question one more time so I can answer it.
It sounds like you guys are looking at changing the way that you determine the protection zone.
Drip line's a good preliminary, gives you a rough idea. We'll then be moving to tree protection zone, which is an arborist defined zones where you're actually looking at the tree and the root systems. In cases where, say, an existing foundation was, that's going to allow the barrier to move closer to the tree than it would using a drip line. In other cases, it may move it further away where we recognize a giant tree has roots that sprawl much further than the drip line. So it's trying to strike a balance in both.
So the
arborist tree protection zone will be the new term that we look for in that final plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
So Lucas, with the large excavator, you're taking until you find the roots.
Oh, ouch.
Jenny,
Supposed to be using the shovel.
That's
The
right.
rubber
Rubber drill bits
drill
for noise and
Yes.
rubber buckets for
yes,
sensitivity.
rubber buckets.
Talking about Tonka toys, right? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Great, can we maybe get, Melissa, can we get the recommendation back on, or,
Sure.
I have a
yeah,
question.
please, Ken.
And maybe also a comment, I think this was thrown out the last time this was brought to the committee there, but for construction, or for the fencing around, protective fencing around the trees, would it be an option to consider using temporary construction fencing, like things that are a lot more reusable, like you can rent those fences from different companies, and then it's just easier, right? You're not buying so much material and then having to recycle it or get rid of it and stuff like that. I think there's gotta be some solutions to just using construction fencing.
So through the chair, we will, I believe that is, yeah, so the sort of the rental metal fencing. No, so we showed that example of one other example, but we will also be proposing that we also include sort of rental fencing as an option. That type of option might not be appropriate on like a vast hillside or complicated terrain, but certainly in smaller applications, we are planning to introduce that option as well.
And then with the tree replacement sale, you talked about increasing from $300 to $500. Is there any options to just take trees, like instead of forfeiting your deposit and then having the city go and plant trees wherever they want to? Is there an option that you can buy the trees and have them planted in certain areas instead of having to kind of forfeit the deposit? Because sometimes you're going to run into sites that you can't fit the trees on there. You don't want to forfeit the deposit, but you'd like to sort of be able to contribute those trees somehow to the community. Is there any flexibility in that right now in the bylaw?
Through the chair, I don't know, Todd, did you have something to say?
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Are we talking about planting that tree in a different private property or in
Or
public lands?
different public land. Yeah.
Different public lands, yeah, okay.
So
That,
through the chair, I mean, that's what the money is used for. So it's a forfeit to you. So you, I mean, I guess you could, so no, it's not currently contemplated in the bylaw, but when you forfeit that $500, that is what the money is used for. It's for the city to then go plant trees in lieu of the one you didn't plant on public land.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if there was an option, like, let's say, instead of forfeiting the $500, like if you're able to get the tree for less and you can take it planted in it that are part of the public property, is that an option? Okay.
So maybe I'll just clarify. So the money is for the purchase, installation, and maintenance for a year.
Okay.
So it might be complicated if we have individual people planting trees in city land, and then how do we administer the maintenance of that over with that? Yeah, so.
yeah,
I also think that it gets very complicated to manage insurance and all of these other pieces, and getting you authorization to be on public lands. I think it's probably best to be built into a broader program. I think the question I think Todd was trying to clarify, and I'm kind of interested in too, is whether or not you can go to another private property that you have authorization to go on, and whether that's contemplated. I don't think it is, but
It's not currently contemplated. I think next generation of conversations outside of this bylaw will probably look at other incentivization programs of how we can get more trees in our community. And that would, be on private land, so.
yeah, and maybe that's something I was planning to touch on is the urban forest strategy has, I think, 55
Yes.
action items recommended there. There are a whole set of them that are encouraging planting on private lands. I think, to your point, Mr. Collins had a very accurate comment there around the administrative challenge. I would also note that we may get into some labor relations issues because the fact that is public work that our unionized staff are doing on public lands. So that doesn't seem like an avenue that I want to walk down.
Yeah, maybe not so much applicable to public lands, but maybe more so private lands if that were ever a consideration. But no, it's just a simple question to ask. And then the other question I had was just how, like, if you're saying currently right now we have a 40% canopy achieved in Abbotsford, so if we're trying to maintain that, and obviously there's a lot more development happening like further up into Sumas Mountain and beyond that area, and you've said that this, obviously you guys have been in contact between Lakes Department and your department about how that's going to be effective, but is there, just from my own perspective as a builder in the construction world, I feel like that might be tough, but you feel pretty confident that it's still achievable with all the development that's going to be happening up in the mountain?
If I may, Councillor Sue. Yeah, I'm feeling pretty confident because, again, it's a community-wide perspective, right? As much as the bylaw is trying to deal with individual properties, we as a staff team are also focused on that broader community piece, knowing that there's some properties that will just, into Mr. Collins' comments earlier, right, just based on kind of their allowable density, they will never be able to achieve that canopy cover. But we have other properties, public, institutional, whatever it may be, that will contribute more than their share, right? So it's truly a balance across the community.
It also ties into the one of the first slides I showed, which talks about sort of these three different buckets of tools that directly and indirectly give us direction on forests, how we manage our forests. So I think through this process, and particularly more as we start talking about how we implement this bylaw, we will also have conversations around whether we need to propose minor updates to other bylaws or policies to help support this initiative.
Great, thank you. Ken, any follow-up?
Yep, that's it.
Ken?
I did have one question. What is the vintage of the current tree bylaws?
2009, 10? I should know. 2009, 2010.
Then is there a plan for updating periodically, or would it be waiting another?
So, no, I think through the conversation of this whole project, we've, because we are introducing some new ideas, some different ideas. And so I think we all acknowledge that we don't want to wait another 10 years. We want to, get the bylaw going. We want to assess how it's working, determine whether the recommendations we made are making a difference, whether they're working. And I think, let's revisit it in a year or two to see what is working or what isn't working, and then just, make it a little bit more of a living document as opposed to waiting a decade before, or more than a decade, before we revamp it. So
Second part was just clarification. I think it was you answered that last one. This is the 25% of the city that's not an AOR, right?
yeah, roughly.
Yeah, not AOR areas.
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the bylaw does, again, through the chair, the bylaw doesn't apply to ALR or forested lands that are under the kind of forest.
Provincial enactments, yeah.
Yes, Rob?
I cut down one tree a year. Would this apply to Christmas tree farms if they're not an ALR? Or is that kind of like or do you just kind of like just keep driving by and don't look? Because it's kind of a crop, really. They planted them and they cut them down.
Rob, query address.
Through the chair, unless you're purchasing 8-inch diameter Christmas trees,
No, I'm not.
it won't count. Or if you're harvesting from a retention area at 10 centimeters, you may, but neither of those will likely occur.
Pretty big Christmas tree to be able to
Yeah.
fall.
No, it's a 6-footer.
We're not gonna spin out.
Yeah.
You're in the book crawl from? You have a
No,
follow-up?
there's no follow-up.
Okay. We have a good conversation on this one, and is anyone prepared to make the recommendation? Nobody? Okay, Lucas, second. Rob, thank you. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, motion carried. Great. We have no new business. I think we can make a motion for adjournment. Kevin, thank you. Hey, Taz, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Great, motion carried. Next meeting is April 12th. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Take care.
Thank you, committee.
Thank you for that.
I know you've heard it how many times.